And welcome to the SpartanMag.com VCast. Jim Comparoni, Paul Konyndyk. I'm at Outson Stadium in Eugene, Oregon. Paul is back home in the state of Michigan, watched it closely, and we're going to talk about Michigan State's loss at Oregon tonight, 31-10. Difficult situation for Michigan State. Oregon was good, better than they've looked any time this season, in my opinion. And in my opinion, I thought they looked better than Ohio State did last week at Spartan Stadium. Very impressed with Oregon and the physicality of their offensive line. They put a hole in Michigan State's ground defense. Michigan State's rush defense has been pretty um, respectable and at times pretty good this year. Not tonight. Oregon steamrolled them at the line of scrimmage, and from there, Michigan State was fighting an uphill battle. So now Michigan State heads into a bye week. Paul and I are going to be talking about it here in the next few minutes. In the meantime, give us a like here on the YouTube Spartan Mag YouTube channel, and also subscribe. And we'd love to have you as a subscriber there, and love to have you a subscriber over at SpartanMag.com. Make sure to check that out as well. Paul, I know you watched this game closely. What are your initial thoughts about what went down?
It doesn't surprise me at all when you look at what Oregon has done at home. Like they had a graphic up on the TV telecast, and they're talking about Oregon leads the country in winning percentage at home since 2019. It's not even. It's like it's. I mean, it's shocking for people to win there. And the thing that I maybe wasn't thinking about enough during the week that I'm kind of thought about more during the game is Michigan State's just trying to get traction with what they want to do on offense, but this is an Oregon team that has faced Oregon State, has faced Jonathan Smith teams, has faced, Brian Lindgren for the past several years. So they
Uh-huh.
know intimately what Michigan State's trying to do, on offense, and they were ready for it. And Jim, I mean, thinking back over the years when we've covered teams that have played Oregon, it's easy to take and look at what they do in their first two games or whatever, and you're like, "Oh, maybe these guys aren't that good, or there's a hole there because sometimes the schedule's not very good." But one of the things I've noticed, like with Dan Lanning, his teams, these guys are usually pretty good on defense, and I
Yeah.
think sometimes we don't maybe give Oregon enough credit on defense because they're such a prolific offense. But I think these guys, I think they're really good on defense, and Michigan State was well scouted, and there wasn't, I'm thinking about like what Aiden Childs had to see when he was in the pocket, like some of those scrambles that were there in every other game. They did the old, Narduzzi, like even Joe Rossi built a fence around the guy, and he can't get in those little comfort zones where you can find the seams. He's there, he can step up. He's got one option short. Gonna get hemmed in there. This is a really well coached defense. That's what impressed me with it.
Yeah. Oregon's been getting better every week. They weren't so great against Idaho. They struggled against Boise State. Better against Oregon State, made Oregon State look bad, made UCLA look bad, a couple of questionable teams. So that's what I was kind of going off of. I thought Michigan State, the way they played against Ohio State, if they duplicated that effort and that what they demonstrated that night, I thought they could be competitive tonight. Something I mentioned in the pre-snap read is that Oregon is getting better, and they do a good job of moving on and making corrections. For instance, against Boise State, they had a couple of sacks with pass protection where they were like cut blocking, like old Joe Tiller cut blocks. Gave up a couple sacks. They got rid of that. They scrapped it. They do a good job of scrapping things, moving on, tighten things up, and they've got a lot of 4 stars and big guys to work with to do some of those things. And uh, you make a good point about they knew what Michigan State was doing. I'll give you an example. And I asked Jonathan Smith about this in the postgame press conference. For instance, when Michigan State runs that, the play action bootleg passes, getting Childs out on the perimeter, all year he's had time and space to operate out there. Today, when he did those bootlegs, there was an Oregon guy, cutting down that distance and in his lap immediately. And I asked Smith about that, and he said they did a good job schematically, bringing some pressure in some places and kind of stunting them out to the outside. That gets to what you're talking about. They've gone against Jonathan Smith's offense. They knew those bootlegs were coming. And I don't know if maybe they picked up on tendencies in terms of formations or where the ball was in relation to the hash as to when those plays were coming. But there was a time early in the game in which Derek Harmon got a pressure at kind of a key point in a series. and it was as if Derek Harmon knew what play was coming, and he practiced against it all spring, right? So they took away some of those bootlegs. That's just one of many things they took away. Michigan State could not run the ball inside. Michigan State's not been able to run the ball really for the last 3 weeks. Couldn't run against Ohio State. Couldn't run against Boston College really. And we knew coming into the season that Michigan State's offensive line was a big question mark, a big variable. A lot of unproven players that had not played with one another. You factor in those injuries, of course, in the different lineups on the offensive line. That's been difficult. Then you go out here in the last 2 weeks and play against two teams ranked in the top 6 nationally, and you end up losing by 3 or 4 touchdowns. Now the question moving forward is whether Michigan State can get anything going with the run game the remainder of the year. They get a bye week right now, comes at a good time. That's a cliche also. Bye weeks always seem to come at a good time, but Smith was pretty emphatic about it. He says, "Hey, we've been going for 5 weeks during training camp, and then six games. That's a long haul. We could use some time off. They're going to take time off. They'll get back to practicing on Wednesday. They have Iowa coming off the bye week. We'll see what Iowa does against Ohio State. I've not studied Iowa yet, but I hear their defense is not quite as good as it was last year. Offense might be a little bit better. I was looking at Michigan State, going into the Boston College game or maybe even halftime of the Ohio State game, thinking, Michigan State can beat Iowa at home. After a game like this, Paul, I'm like, well, maybe I was getting ahead of myself a little bit. This makes me pause about whether Michigan State can get one of these wins in this so-called gauntlet. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think that's the case. I don't think Michigan State's any different than they were after Ohio State. I just think it's easy for us as writers, to be honest with you. Like when you see a team like, okay, they lost three straight, and they lost, but they played the two best teams in the Big Ten, arguably. And you're playing a Friday night road game after playing a late game. Playing a late game at home. I mean, it's just brutal what Michigan State has gone through, and so it's like it's easy to pump the brakes and say, hey, this team isn't as good. But I've been saying this for the last several weeks that the two teams that they're going to have the hardest time with because of the talent discrepancy, because of the skill players, because of kind of some of the scheme stuff they do are Ohio State and Oregon. These are the two teams that they're not going to be able to match up with. We saw even tonight the way Michigan State scrapped and clawed on defense. Even against these high-powered teams, they're more competitive defensively than they have been. So it stands with, at least from where I see it, because I see them making progress. I saw Charles Brantley and Malik Spencer played great. This is Malik Spencer, in my opinion, his best game. Tonight, and I thought Brantley played good as well, and they were able to, and they didn't really get blown away by skill. There's that deep ball on the first drive where it's like, oh, it's an Oregon guy, it's a Pac-12 guy, he's going to blow Malik Spencer away. No, he didn't. I think Malik Spencer got away with a little bit of PI there, but the fact is that he shows some recovery speed. So I think, like Michigan State has held up better against some of these skill guys from Oregon and Ohio State than they have in past years. On the flip side, I think that I think this defense is really good, Jim. I'm not ready to give up on it, just because they have the mentality and they believe in themselves, and they never gave up. How much Oregon had to work to get in the end zone. We've seen games in the past against Ohio State where a Dante Moore type of player would come in and he had two touchdowns and it would be a blowout type scenario. It wasn't like that tonight. Michigan State never quit. They played a lot of heavy football. I mean, that Boston College game, yeah, you can look back and say, hey, they should have won that game. But based on the way Boston College played before Castellanos got hurt, and then the other thing you look at too, I hate to be jumping all over the place, but I'm ADD and it's 3 in the morning. But the quality quarterbacks they played in the last 3 games, Castellanos, veteran, like Will Howard, veteran. Oh, by the way, the guy tonight, 54 starts under his belt compared to 6 starts for an Aiden Childs. I mean, I just like you got to look at where Michigan State is at, and they're in the building process. They've done some good enough things where you're like, I think schematically at times they're right where they need to be, but they got to get better running the football, and I'm not willing to throw in the towel and say it's not going to happen because I do think it's one of those deals where it's incremental progress, and you got to keep on working at it. You got to stay committed to it, and you do get better over the course of the year if you maintain that commitment. I thought they did a couple good things in the second half where they changed up what they did, and it was more like quarterback runs. And then in that last drive, they did get a couple decent runs, but I think it's too easy or too like I don't know. It's too not maybe cynical just to say, hey, all of a sudden they got beat by the two best teams in the talent wise in the conference, they're going to get beat by Iowa. I don't think that's the case. I think they've shown already that they can punch with teams in their own peer group. They're going to execute at a higher level, and I do think Childs made a little bit of progress tonight in some ways, and I do think you can get better in the bye week, and I think they will. I think there's going to be, I think they're going to get rejuvenated out of that bye week.
Yeah, I asked Smith about Oregon's success on the ground. I mean, Oregon has had some good moments this year on the ground, but this is their best ground uh, game of the year. That's alarming. To me, the biggest negative is Oregon rushing for 192 yards in the first half. To me, that's hard to process. It's easy to process. Michigan State was manhandled and overwhelmed by an offensive line that's been okay this year, but really came to play and did some great things today with, their counter runs and the pin and pulls and bringing all kinds of humanity at them. And Michigan State, Smith said, "Hey, they've got a lot of one-on-one talent, a very good quarterback. It's kind of like the Ohio State game. If you start taking people, if you're preventing big plays in the pass game, they're going to hit you with the other thing, which in this case was the ground game. If they'd loaded up to stop the run, that might have opened them up to give up yards in the pass. If Michigan State could have played this game again, every coach would say, okay, this time let's stack the box a little bit, stop the run, and make them throw to Tez Johnson, make them throw to Holden, and maybe they would have. But the fact of the matter is, um, Dylan Gabriel, one of the more prolific passers in the history of college football, coming in completing 81% of his passes, completes 63%. Held him 20 points below his percentage. And they do a lot with dink and dunk stuff and everything. He's 20 out of 32 for 257. He was functional, did a good job with the carry game as a runner here and there, but he didn't just like light them up. I mean, this guy's gone 28 for 30 against some people, maybe not those numbers, but fact of the matter is Michigan State intercepted him twice at the goal line, once in the end zone. Um, there's a couple drops here and there, but he also had a 35 yarder where a guy, catches it when he's falling down. On that play, no, there was a different play. There's one play where Armorion Smith bit on kind of a scramble to run situation. It's quarters zone. Armorion Smith is in a deep safety, and he vacates his safety, his two deep twin safety deep. I guess his quarters, his quarter lane, vacates it to come up to stop the run. And he's not across the line of scrimmage, throwing it deep, guy wide open, 30 yards. That was early, maybe their first or second possession. And Smith immediately came out, and Denson went in, and Denson pretty much was the first safety off the bench the rest of the way. These are the things Michigan State's still ironing out. If you make a mistake, it's a competitive situation, you're replaced. Now, Smith, everybody loves him. He's got a lot on his plate, and everybody knows that. But, games like this, you kind of learn who you can trust. And you backfill and you build on it and so forth. But the pass defense, like you said, Brantley had about 9 tackles, had an interception. As good as Gabriel is, as good as what Oregon does with their offense, Michigan State still kind of baited him into a couple of interceptions. And Spencer, second time in a row, he's had an interception opportunity in the end zone. Last week he dropped one. This one he got it and finished it. That's not by accident when that starts happening. As good as Oregon was with the ground game, you make a good point that you like the defense, and the secondary is certainly better than it was last year, even though they gave up some yardage today. But it was the ground game that the ground defense. Here's the good news: they played Ohio State, they played Oregon. Those are both pick your poison teams with NFL talent at wide receiver, good quarterbacks, great ground game, good offensive lines. Going forward, you'll play Iowa, who doesn't have that kind of balance. You can maybe make them one-dimensional. Smith said tonight he wanted to make Oregon one-dimensional, never got that done. After that, you've got Michigan. Everybody is aware of their problems. Now, they're very good on defense. They've got a good ground game. So Michigan State during the bye week needs to get well, needs to become firm, fix some of those aches and pains, come out of it ready to stop the run against Iowa and Michigan. They do that, they'll be in position to win one of those games. And then Indiana after that. Indiana probably has a chance is going to be more one-dimensional than Iowa or Michigan. But the next 2 games, they're not going to be pick your poison offenses like the last 2 teams they played. Michigan State just played the two of the top 6 teams in the country.
Yeah, I mean that's something to keep in mind. And the other thing I would say is like one of the things that I think makes Oregon tricky is like some of the tight ends. They take you
Yeah.
deep a little bit, and they hold. They do a lot of strategic holding. And I'm not trying to be like Jim Brandstatter here and say, hey, where's the flag, Jim? But there's a lot of times where I felt like I felt like Michigan State's D line in that the first quarter, I felt like they were getting home a little bit, and I thought they were doing some really good things, and they were mixing it up. But I thought that offensive line, um, they were adjusting, and they were a little bit physical, but they hold strategically a little bit. They just bump you just enough to make it so that quarterback can get the playoff. But the one thing the area that they do a real nice job is with that tight ends, they make it really hard for your defensive backs or linebackers if they take you deep to come back. And so like a lot of the underneath stuff kind of goes for a little bit longer than it might against some other teams because those tight ends are pretty good at being physical. I
That
really
was
like what
their
they do.
their most explosive play was that screen to Ferguson, went for about 60 yards. That the wide receivers didn't quite get loose. They get loose on a lot of people. Ohio State's guys get loose on a lot of people also. But Michigan State, if there's one little blue ribbon you can give them a little helmet sticker for, they've kept a lid on the deep pass game against
Yeah,
two
and
teams
that's
that'll stress you in that area.
right. And that's not something we were expecting coming in. I mean, to be honest with you, like like and even when you look at Maryland, that uh, look at the skill players that Michigan State's played. Even like that Maryland receiver is Ty Felton's amazing. Caden Prather, I mean, he's good. And these guys have kind of like I've been really surprised at Michigan State's defensive backs. The primary playing group has kind of gotten better. Like I thought Chuck Brantley, he's gotten better over the course of the season. I think Malik Spencer's starting to come into his own. The question is like one of the things I thought, why I think I like Michigan State's defense is the depth on the front seven. So I'm kind of wondering with the bye week, if Michigan State's goal is to get better on defense and as the season goes on, you're going to need a guy like Justin Denson to come along. You're going to
Yeah.
need that guy coming out of the bye week. And to me, that's kind of the litmus test because um, that fatigue tends to set in. But if you can get a little bit more depth, get Amarian Smith a little bit more into the program, get Justin Denson a little bit more experience, and tonight the positive of games like this is, like I wrote about it just a second ago, but you see Ruquan Buckley out there a lot more tonight, and those guys that started the season as back into the rotation guys that really quite didn't have trust are starting to get that trust, and so I think there's some good development, but it's all going to come down to whether Michigan State can continue getting that development on the offensive line. What do they do during what do they do during the bye week? Is it a Raheem Johnson type situation? Are they going to get him oiled up to take on a bigger role, or are you going to stick with Brandon Baldwin at guard? Are you trying to get him more comfortable with Lepo? Or are you trying to get him going with Raheem Johnson? Like that's my big thing. Like I think decisions have to be made, whether you're going to stick with guys or not. But I just wonder too some of that. I mean, I look at Brandon Baldwin out there, and granted, he's played two offensive lines with or two defensive lines with plenty of NFL talent, but he doesn't quite seem like he's got traction at guard. To me, it just doesn't feel quite right. He's still kind of feeling his way out there, and it doesn't make it any easier when you got like a relatively inexperienced right tackle next to you. So these when Jonathan Smith was talking about his radio show after the game tonight, he was talking about self-evaluation. I think one of the things that they need to really take a close look at self-evaluating is um, maybe, I mean, they're going to have different ways they can go, but what do they think is the best for the short term? What's the best for the long term? But and maybe that's what they're trying to think about right now is like who's going to give us the best opportunity um, by the end of the season. But Michigan State needs to get some stuff taken care of on the offensive line. I don't think it's always drastic. I think sometimes it's incremental, like I said before, and sometimes it's little things. But they do need to use this week, get mentally reset, obviously with a couple of days off. But they need to get to work, do some self scouting, and really kind of fine tune in the details and get that offensive line taken care of. And
Yeah, it's all about the trenches with this team, and people are. I've heard some criticisms of Brandon Baldwin. I'll have to go back and watch it again, but yeah, there's some struggles there at right guard. There were last week
Well, I
also.
mean, but here's the thing. Here's the thing, guys. People are gonna rip on whoever they've seen the most, and sometimes it's not always that guy. Sometimes it is, but like you hear criticism for a lot of guys last year. Like I'm thinking of some of the veterans, the guys around the inside that have played the most. Oh, we haven't done crap for 3 years. You throw the bums out. I just think it's like you got to kind of have a plan. You got to stick with it. You hopefully avoid injuries. But one of the other things that I think they need to work on is like I don't know if Mike Masunas when he's going to come back, but they need like like a Parachek. He's got some talent as a pass catcher, but tonight I think he got a couple times where had issues with some of his blocking, run blocking and pass blocking, and that's what a bye week could do too to get him headed in the right direction because you don't really miss a Mike Masunis until you don't have him.
Yeah, Oregon. I mean, they've got three really good tight ends, and a couple of them are 4 stars. They got 4 stars up and down the roster. Cristobal, when he was here, he tried to recruit like an SEC recruiter. Um, before NIL, they stacked some really good top 15 classes, and you kind of seeing some of that come to fruition. Plus, some of the things they've gotten out of the transfer portal. They've
Well,
Tez Johnson, the wide receiver, is a transfer guy. Birch, the big defensive end, is a transfer from South Carolina. So they've done it across the board. Derek Harmon from Michigan State. They're well funded. It's quite an operation here. You were here with me 10 years ago, and they've been good for 25 years or more. It's quite an operation they've got going here. Beautiful campus. Last time I was here, I didn't really get to see the campus as well. Today I took a long walk through the campus and just the program itself. Interestingly, you go all the way back to 1998 when Amp Campbell was here and had that spinal cord injury, and he came back from that. Good for him. Michigan State was blown out that year. They had Reuben Drones. That was when Oregon was just turning the corner with Mike Bellotti, Reuben Drones, and Achilles Smith, and they've really been really good since then. Maybe a couple years prior to that, but that game I remember Oregon. I think every single they beat Michigan State something like 48-14, and I think all 48 points for Oregon were scored by players from California. And when I put the pre-snap read together this week, it occurred to me I think there's only one kid from California. I have to double check that, but it's more of it's a cliche to talk about national recruiting, but Oregon is doing some national recruiting. They put together a team, Cristobal with SEC recruiting when he was here previously, and Lanning coming in now. Those big bodies that Mel Tucker used to talk about, Oregon has them. I mean, in the pre-snap read, when I was looking at Oregon and how they struggled against Boise State. I was kind of thinking, they may not be as good as their ranking. Well, they jacked it up, ratcheted it up for Michigan State. They look like a top 10 team, top 6 team, and a team that's going to give Ohio State all they want, in my opinion.
yeah, and let's not forget that like Ashton Jenny might be like the front runner for the Doak Walker Award. That's a
Man,
good tailback, and that's a great
whew,
Boise State
for
running
Boise State.
operation. Yeah, and that's Michigan State running backs coach Keith Banafa. That's his guy. He recruited Ashton Jenny when he was at Boise State. That's his. That's their bread and butter. They've owned the Mountain West on the ground. Them in Wyoming, like when Wyoming's been good, and they've got. That's not a. It's as well as I do. There's some teams that just really run the ball well in the first game of the year, and it's hard to face those teams in the first year. I remember Michigan State with their top 5 defense under D'Antonio going up against Air Force, and some of the stuff they did with but Boise State is tough, and Ashton Jenny is better than any as good as any tailback in the Big Ten. I just think
He's
he's got
tough.
wiggle, power.
He
He's a
does.
really good ball player, and he's a lot
He
of fun to
is.
watch. And he's been around forever.
James Jordan
So
tonight for Oregon was better than I realized. Sometimes you watch someone live, you're like, man, he looks better than he did on video. So James Jordan, over 100 yards rushing in the first half, 24 rushes, 166 for the game. What do you make about this? Second half, Oregon runs the ball 14 times for 21 yards, 1.5 per carry. Of course, the game is put away, and Oregon had some second stringers in later in the game. But what do you make of Michigan State holding them to 1.5 yards per carry in the second half after just getting steamrolled in the first half? I asked Smith about it, and he said it wasn't really any schematics. We just had some guys with some pride that played harder, and we just fitted up better. That's what Smith said. What do you
yeah, I
make of
don't think
that?
so. I'd like to talk to Joe Rossi about that because I'm sure like, Joe Rossi is really good at seeing details, and I think there's probably some keys that Michigan State didn't have going into the game in terms of what they're doing play wise because some of that running stuff was like it was not just well blocked up, but it was you know
Oof.
the eye level the eye what you think of as Michigan State being disciplined, they weren't always in the spot where you'd expect them to be. And I think that they didn't have quite as much intel as they needed to have coming into this game, where their keys were a little bit different.
Now, Aiden Childs, 10 out of 17, had one dropped. Childs had the fumble at the 1 yard line, but I didn't think he really made like any glaring errors in terms of decisions to put the ball in the air. Did you? Is that progress?
It is progress because his biggest issue so far has been decision making. And if there is a place that you could make bad decisions, it's a guy that came from Oregon State, hates Oregon, and is going to go try to put the team on his shoulders. And as well as I do that we've seen that 3 games ago, he would have had 5 interceptions tonight. It would have been one of those games where he's hemmed in, he just throws the ball up for grabs. You didn't see that. You saw him penned in a lot. You saw him looking to scramble. But aside from the early fumble, he didn't do anything really. He didn't do anything like foolhardy. He just took his medicine, and for him, that is progress. Maybe not for some guys, but that shows me that he is, he's developing and he's gaining some good stuff. I like the way he finished in this game. I like the way he ran the football. Some of that stuff. Anytime he gets to the point where you have design runs or you have like option stuff, and he gets a chance to run against decent defenders, it's a chance for him to grow because, I don't know if people realize this or most college football fans realize this is like these guys don't really run a whole lot in practice. They're wearing the red jersey and stuff like that. So every time he's taking these reps out there, it's an opportunity for him to learn in a game scenario. And I think he did a nice job. I think Michigan
You mean
State did a nice job making some adjustments. And, you don't want to overrun him because you don't want to get him hurt. But I thought he did make progress. And the one area that I think he is kind of like subtly making progress is he's starting to get some good on the field rapport with Jack Velling. And Jack Felling did a nice job tonight. I think this is the second time in 3 games that he's had 50 yards receiving. And I think it's only a matter of time before you see some of that red zone production that was kind of like a calling card for him at Oregon State. But Jack Felling's becoming more involved in the passing game. And even some of that underneath receiving stuff that they did, I thought Oregon had that stuff pretty well covered. The one thing that Aiden Childs needs to work on, I think, is there's a couple short passes that were just off by a little bit. We heard
and he
Ryan Lindgren say earlier this week that sometimes he gets pushed off his spot in the pocket and it hurts his footwork gets off and his throwing mechanics get off. That's what he needs to work in the bye week. I think mechanically he has shown improvement over the last couple of weeks, but there's still a lot of work for him to do. And some of those easily completable passes that he makes in his sleep, um, aren't completable when you've got bad mechanics. But there's some good throws today. The fourth and 2 throw to Nick Marsh, that was nails, and that's progress for Michigan State's entire offense because they on fourth down at midfield, that's a lot of pressure in that situation. The other one was the pass to Jerron Glover in that first drive on the sideline. That was just a bullet, and that was a good job by Jerron Glover.
third
But
third and 10 come back along the sidelines. Yeah,
3rd and 13, wasn't it? I don't know,
third
something like that. It
13,
was
third and
third and
12.
long. But then again, you can't. That's what happens when you don't have a run game. You get in 3rd and 10,
Yeah,
3rd and 13, and
yeah,
against NFL guys, good night. I don't care if you got CFL guys, you're gonna
yeah.
have a long day.
And we started seeing that pass rush, pass protection really deteriorate at the end of the first half when it became clear that Michigan State did not have a run game and the old proverbial case of pass rushers pinning their ears back. So guys like Uwe and Birch, who are not the quickest guys, but when they know it's a passing situation, that makes them just a little bit quicker. They're starting getting home and start wearing down the Michigan State offensive tackles. They're a little bit of a question mark. You mentioned the 4th and 2. Michigan State making an aggressive play there at midfield, opening drive. We're going to go for it. And Smith said, it doesn't sound like the deep pass was necessarily the play call. That's just what presented itself based on the coverage. That was one of the routes. If they're going to press Marsh, he runs a go. And to your point, Marsh was open, maybe not wide open, but Childs didn't miss him early in the year. Open receivers deep, he was missing them. Maybe because there was a little better coverage. Maybe that's why he connected on that one. But a key moment, 4th and 2 on the road, and Childs delivered a good ball there. Good for him on that. I agree, that is progress. So 10 out of 17 for Childs, facing all kinds of duress, all kinds of pass pressure, especially from maybe early in the second quarter on. People were asking me about Schuster and people criticizing Childs, and I was like, man, don't criticize Childs. He had no time to throw. He had no running game. He's going against a very good defense full of NFL players. And he, aside from the fumble, he made very few mistakes. So people see him get sacked and they think that's his fault. I mean, come on. Tom Brady would not have done in his prime wouldn't have done real well with that pass rush out there today. But Childs, that the fumble, Smith was talking about that, and he said that that play is 1st and 10, and Smith said we were gonna take a shot at it, meaning they're gonna do a play action, see if it's open, and if it's not open, throw it away. So it's not open, and he tucks it and tries to score with his feet. And Smith's like, that's the competitor that Childs is. I talked to him after that play. Smith said about Childs. So they're kind of looking for, discretion is the better part of valor in a 1st and 10 situation like that. Third and goal at the 1, maybe do tuck and try to get it in there. But um, trying to rein in the competitive juices of Childs, you love that he's an envelope pusher and you love all that talent, but they left 7 points. Looked like a sure seven. It looked like a sure 7-0 lead for Michigan State there early in the game after forcing a 3-and-out. Now Oregon was still going to win the game because they were superior in the trenches, and that was eventually going to show itself. But a 7-0 lead would have really put a charge into things and at least given Michigan State some riding time for the brand to look good, being up on Oregon on the road early. Childs trying too hard, fumbles at the 1 yard line, another Childs mistake as he continues to learn.
Yeah, it's not the for me. It's not. I don't care like what Smith said about like what he wanted him to do. To me, it's not that. It's the way he was carrying the ball. Like
Yeah,
it came out way too easy. It's just to
yeah.
me, it's the same as the Jack Belling thing. Really, it's not what he did. We're not talking about L.J. Scott circa 2015 in that 25 play drive or whatever against Iowa, just reaching out with that ball and going over the goal line in the Big Ten championship game. We're talking about a guy that's falling forward and he's just got the ball too loose and it's not tight enough. If you're gonna scramble and you're gonna be around the goal line and there's a lot of traffic, you got to hold that ball tight. And it wasn't. I don't think it was an unnecessary risk. It was just not mechanic. It's not fundamentally where it should have been. Just same thing with Jack Belling. And Jack Belling's a great dude, great kid. A lot of both those guys have a high care factor, but I don't think that was a unnecessary risk. I just think that was one of those deals where your fundamentals break down. And so like we talk about all the time about what does it take? It takes, doing the simple things better. I mean, really, I mean, those are things that you work on all the time, but you've got to be really cognizant of that, of where you are, and you can't give up that ball in that situation.
All right, so go ahead. I'm sorry.
No.
So Michigan State's got Iowa, Michigan, and Indiana coming up. They're 3-3 through the first half of the season. Could have been better, could have been worse. Um, Looking forward to the bye week. Michigan State is. Before we sign off here, confidence level for Michigan State. You think this damages much? I asked Jack Velling and Charles Brantley about that a little bit, and you can still see a lot of hunger in their eyes. They feel like they can compete. They've been on the field with, I think, the two best teams in the Big Ten. Um, I don't know how many teams in the country have played two top six teams at this point in the season. I don't think anybody has, right? Florida's got a tough schedule, but in terms of playing two top six teams this early,
And then
back to
and then
back,
also
no less.
then also playing Boston College, which is a good team, when they've got their quarterback, in Maryland, which is a good team. Like so I mean that's four quality opponents, and not a lot of people have. I'll say this though. Charles Brantley has been on the field and had his butt handed to him a lot worse than this game. Like this, there's still respectable things being done by the defense. Jack Velling, even last year against Oregon, Oregon State had a better offensive line, had a better rushing attack. They didn't do very well against Oregon. They got blown out badly, and some of that had to do with I think the coaching change or the knowledge that there's a coaching change. But playing in this environment, I don't. There's no shame. There's no shame losing to these guys, and I think Michigan State. I mean, they're hitting hard, they're playing hard, and teams are saddling up for them. They're respecting Michigan State. The intensity level ratcheted up after the way Michigan State started on defense. You could see Oregon's kind of saddling up and kind of rising to the occasion, and you see quarterbacks having a hard time getting up off the ground when they're getting hit. I'm just telling you, like Michigan State is physical again on defense, and it's a good thing to see. But they got to get to the point where they're executing better on offense, and that's going to be for me what I'm looking at coming out of the bye week.
Yeah,
What kind of steps can you take to uh, execute better? And there's really for as good a stuff as the coaches are putting together for them to get down in the red zone, you can't have that. You can't cough up the opportunities. And Smith said it as much tonight. Against good teams, you got to take advantage of your opportunities. Otherwise, they're going to exploit your weaknesses, and that's kind of what's happened each of the last 2 weeks.
yeah. And I was going to say something else. I can't remember what it was. It's late. I'll let you go, Paul. I appreciate all your insight and everything. But it's going to come back down to the offensive line. Smith was asked a very good question. Realistically, can the offensive line get any better? Basically, is what he was asking. And Smith was like, yeah, we got a bye week. We're going to look at some schematical things. We're going to look at personnel decisions and so forth. So Smith is upbeat. Maybe he's just saying that because he wants his players to know that he believes in them. I question whether, what kind of, the ceiling of what this particular group of offensive linemen can become in the next 2 months. But they're not going to be playing Ohio State or Oregon. Now, Michigan's got a good defense. Iowa's got a good defense. And so the chances of holding an opponent under 30 points is going to increase the next two times out. It won't be for 15 days. Michigan State's going to get some well-earned rest now as they try to get 3 more wins and get a postseason bid, which would be a nice step in the right direction for a season. Michigan, people came in not expecting much at all from Michigan State. They're picked number 17 out of 18 in the Big Ten. Got a chance to build on some of what they did in the first half of the season, and it starts in 15 days. We'll be changing gears a little bit toward basketball next week, and football recruiting and basketball recruiting is still going pretty heavy. Got the fog rolling in at Autzen Stadium, and we'll be signing off now. Paul, anything else?
No.
I appreciate your work, Paul. Appreciate your time. I'll see you when I get back home. Great job, Paul. For Paul Konyndyk, my name is Jim Comparoni. You've been watching the VCast from Autzen Stadium with the Spartans for SpartanMag.com.